All right, I'll try to make this video, but I'm not sure if it's going to work because I'm so pissed off by the information that the South Nation Conservation is giving out, or the misinformation, I should say. Anyway, let's start. Oh, must be my phone. So, I think every year, every 2 year, the South Nation Conservation gives a report of forest quality, water, wetland cover, forest cover, water quality, well water quality, and that kind of stuff. And here is it. It's for 2018, and they just released it for 2023, I believe. Is it 2023? Yes, it is. So they must release it every year. Anyways, I want to discuss the information because it's not good. It's not good. They give themselves passing grades where they should be failing, and they also give themselves an A, which is basically excellent in wetland cover, and again they are failing as per the same publication that the government uses, that they're using. So the provincial publication that the South Nation Conservation uses to evaluate whether they're doing a good job or not, whether there's enough forest cover, wetland cover or not, is all based on how much habitat is enough, which is reviewed. So there's a more than one reiteration. But again, how much habitat is enough is the name of the publication. And in that publication, the government of Ontario makes certain points clear that obviously the South Nation either is ignorant about or is deliberately hiding the information, hoping that the public won't notice. So the first thing I want to talk about is the State of the Nation report, that is dated to June 2014. So most of the information that they give every year since at least 2016 or at least 2014 is the same information they give every year. So the information they give in this report for forest cover and wetland cover is the same information they've given every year since 2014. So if you go look at the report, so I've got the 2018 report, you can go look at every year, they give exactly the same stat from 2014, which is now 9 years old. So for the last 9 years, the South Nation Conservation has given the exact same information for half of its quality report. So the Watershed report card is useless, basically. You can go look at 2014 and you'll see the same information you're going to see this year for forest quantity, forest cover, and wetland cover. So what's the point? And even in that information since 2014, so 9 years going, they've been falsifying the quality of the environment. So basically, first, I guess we can start talking about the State of the Nation report. So it summarizes results and recommendations on forest, wetland, and river conditions within South Nation Conservation's jurisdiction. The report is based on data collected from 2008 to 2012. So here I'm saying that the information they're giving you that based on information from 2014 is actually based from information 2008 to 2012. So the information is more than 10 years old. So, and they're still giving it out every year in their Watershed report card. Anyway, so that's the first pet peeve that I have, and there's a lot. Monitoring data confirms that SNC's program continue to have a positive impact on the environment. However, there's room for improvement. Damn right. This report will help SNC focus its programming to areas where conservation effort will have the most benefit. This is a statement from the executive summary from the report, and it directly contradicts their monitoring data. So here's the rest of the summary, which contradict the first part of the summary. Forest conditions at 29.5 and forest interior 8.7% measured within SNC's jurisdiction are slightly below Environment Canada's minimum guideline values of 30% and 10% respectively. Slightly below minimum guideline values. And if you go look at the report for this year, they don't mention that. They don't mention that they're below the minimum threshold that the government of Ontario suggests. And they're giving themselves a C. Right there, they're failing. It's an F. Fail. They fail. They're below minimum guideline. So forest cover, forest interior, and forest riparian cover all fall below the minimum guideline value set by Environment Canada. So before proceeding further, let's observe what Environment Canada has to say about its own guidelines in section 2.3.1 of How Much Habitat is Enough, version 3. Guideline: 30% forest cover at the watershed scale is the minimum forest cover threshold. This equates to a high-risk approach that may only support less than 1/2 of the potential species richness and marginally healthy aquatic system. 40% forest cover at the watershed scale equates to a medium-risk approach that is likely to support more than 1/2 of the potential species richness and moderately healthy aquatic system. 50% forest cover or more at the watershed scale equates a low-risk approach that is likely to support most of the potential species and healthy aquatic system. So, to summarize, they are falling below the high-risk approach that may only support less than 1/2 of the potential species richness. They're falling below, and they're giving themselves a passing grade. So, going back to how much habitat is enough from Environment Canada, I thought it was from the province, but it's actually from the federal government. Bum, bum, bum. Rationale: there's tremendous interest in minimum threshold levels for forest cover and other habitat types required to support healthy levels of native flora and fauna. Such threshold can facilitate natural heritage planning and help support initiatives to protect and expand forest cover. However, given the current data gaps in site-specific and landscape-scale habitat requirements of different species and group of species, the science that is currently available to support such threshold is limited. While there are several studies that examine forest cover threshold, these studies acknowledge that the research has been conducted for relatively few species and taxonomic groups, primarily birds, and is rarely undertaken for long enough periods of time at large enough scales or with sufficient replicates to make the finding robust. Therefore, the value provided here should be viewed as generalized guidance based on the available science. Being a wetland environment, the South Nation falling at 29% or 28% forest cover, we can safely assume that we're falling below a high-risk approach. We're certainly not at a medium or low-risk approach. We're at a high-risk approach. It's a failing grade. It's a failing grade, or if it's passing, it's a D-. The South Nation Conservation clearly fails to acknowledge the high-risk approach they are taking in regards to forest cover, as further demonstrating by their ensuing generic recommendation that make no mentions of Environment Canada's already shaking grounds for establishing minimum threshold levels as markers of a healthy environment. The report does not indicate that the author had read on to understand how much habitat is enough. So even though they're using this publication to interpret their data, they're using certain selective parts that is convenient for them, right? So 30% is the minimum. Anyways, you can see that they're not lying, but they're not telling the whole truth, basically. So to make sure that you don't understand how bad the situation is. According to a report the SNC released earlier the same year entitled Forest Cover and Trend Analysis in February of 2014, so a few months prior, they had this to say about the very same subject. Despite the national trend in declining forest loss, after decades of increasing forest cover, local forest cover has begun to decline. In 1946, the first systematic assessment of forest cover commenced and was completed the following year. The result of this survey indicated that forest cover in the South Nation River watershed in 1946, was at 15.6. Right? So basically, the South Nation has identified a declining forest cover starting in 2014 from data from 2012. Right, you have to remember that. So in this report, the SNC makes clear that forest cover is not increasing, right? It's decreasing. And it will not increase in the years to come. Their manipulation of data, however, is worrying. In their report entitled State of the Nation, they set the total forest cover in the total SNC jurisdiction at 29.5 for 2012-2013, when they know that the actual South Nation watershed has a total forest cover in 28.1, as shown as forest cover and trend reported just a month earlier. So there's discrepancies in reports only a few months apart. Right, 29.5 and 28.1. So why? Also, the SNC inadvertently admits that is effectively reverse reforestation efforts by at least 2 decades, since they state that the forest cover was at 25.8 in 1983, around it, and we are only 2% over this number in 2014. So they've added a really crude report indicating that it's decreasing. Forest cover is decreasing. So this table indicates that forest cover was little less than 25% in 2007, even if no mention is made as that number anywhere else. Also, the same report states that deforestation continued until 2008, and I have it under good authority after having observed increased in agricultural deforestation and having spoken to local farmers about it, that deforestation is on the rise in the South Nation watershed since 2012, when the international price of wheat peaked. I do not understand how the SNC was able to successfully increase forest cover by 2.8% to 2008, because all evidence points toward a decline in forest cover unless they are playing with statistics by adding new forested regions to their territory or by changing the way they count forests in order to count more. Or they're just not good at counting. Let's see. Let's go to wetland cover. Wetland cover in the SNC jurisdiction is excellent at 17% compared to Environment Canada's minimum guideline value of 10%. Let's pump the brakes and let's see what Environment Canada has to say about that. So again, going to how much habitat is enough version 3. Environment Canada takes even more cautious approach to our wetland than it does to our forest, as can be seen in section 2.1.1. Wetlands in the watershed and subwatershed. Guideline. Ensure no net loss of wetland area and focus on maintaining and restoring wetland functions at a watershed and subwatershed scale based on historic reference conditions. At a minimum, the greater of A, 10% of each major watershed and 6% of each subwatershed, or B, 40% of the historic watershed wetland coverage should be protected and restored. While the SNC seemed proud to announce that wetland coverage at 70%, this statistic does not fare so well when pitted against Environment Canada's rationale for setting 10% as the minimum guideline value. While the SNC seemed like it's doing a good job. Let's see what happens. Let's see again how much habitat is enough. Version 3. All watershed in southern Ontario currently have less wetland cover than they did prior to extensive European settlement, with losses exceeding 70% in many jurisdictions, including the South Nation watershed. The guideline addresses basic, minimal, generic ecological functions and does not address overall loss of unique wetland ecosystem that dominated portions of southern Ontario, including the South Nation watershed. Any investment in wetland restoration beyond the minimum guideline toward the historical wetland baseline will result in enhanced functions and contributions to ecological goods and services. Maintenance of wetland cover across the watershed provides many ecological and hydrological benefits. The extent of these benefits varies depending on a variety of biophysical factors including predominant landforms and soils, wetland locations, types of wetlands, and predominant land use. Historically, the overall wetland coverage within the Great Lakes Basin exceeded 10%, but there was significant variability. The South Nation River essentially drains the western area where the Champlain Sea and then Lake Lampesis made its last stand before ultimately transforming into a delta of the Ottawa River. While this delta has changed drastically over the few thousand years between the Champlain Sea and the present, the South Nation River has come to drain much of the western portion of these massive prehistoric bodies of water. Remains of these extensive historical wetlands, such as Mer Bleue, Cobb's Lake, and the Alfred Bog, including Moose Creek Bog, and Winchester Forest, Winchester Bog, at the west of Westchester. None of them are even a third of the size they once were. One particular wetland, Cobb's Lake, is now completely drained, but once held millions of cubic liters of water within its vast shallow networks of beaver ponds. 17% of overall wetland coverage is absolutely ridiculous, when the South Nation River has all the historical and statistical evidence pointing towards a major wetland delta within its watershed, over 70%. The South Nation River watershed has had as much, if not more, open wetland than it did forest, which means that 17% is not only poor, but falls way short of Environment Canada's second standard, see above, for wetland, which is 40% of historical wetland cover. Basically, the South Nation has to choose between 10% or, let's go back to so 17%. Blah, 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 blah. Wetland covering at 17%. Oh, I forgot where the statistic is. Let's wait. So look, again, I just had to find the friggin' quote. At a minimum, the greater of 10% of each major watershed, or be 40% of the historic watershed wetland coverage. So the greater of. So basically, the South Nation has to choose whichever options between the two creates a greater amount of wetland. So ideally, because the South Nation River was over 70% wetland, this means that they have to go with option B, which is 40% of the historic watershed wetland coverage, right? Because 10% is less than 40% of the historic watershed. So basically, the South Nation conservation is using the wrong statistics, either by ignorance or either purposefully, to make it look like they're in the report card. They're doing an excellent job with wetlands, and again, they are below the threshold offered by Environment Canada. So they're failing, and they're giving themselves an A. They're giving themselves an excellent grade. They're saying that wetlands in the South Nations are excellent. That must be why the water is so brown and there's landslides all over the place. Woo! So another report from the South Nation Watershed, the South Nation Conservation, is water quality. And again, it's in their State of the Nation report. So using biological indicators, they're saying that the streams monitored are good to fair conditions, right? Good to fair conditions. And they, using biological indicators. Wow. Okay, so let's talk about the exceedances. So they look for nitrate, chloride, and zinc, and phosphorus. So phosphorus exceeds the minimum guideline value set by Environment Canada all over the watershed. So there's way too much phosphorus in the water. And that's because of agriculture, intensive cash cropping. Especially corn adds a lot of phosphorus because of the fertilizer that corn needs. So cash cropping creates unsustainable phosphorus overload, and phosphorus creates algae blooms, which you can see every year from Plantagenet to Castleman. If you go look in August and September, you will find an algae bloom and eutrophic conditions, meaning that there's no more oxygen in the water for any other types of fish except for usually carp and mud minnows. So phosphorus is too high all over the watershed. So they've made 32 observations. No, wait. How many observations they made in total? So let's see. South Nation River at Roebuck, they made 32 observations. And 17% of them were over the minimum guideline values. At South Mountain, 36 observation, 10 of them exceeded phosphorus levels. South Nation River at Inkerman, downstream of the South Branch, 35 observation, and 29 of them exceeded. At Chesterville, 36 observation, 32% of them, 32 of 36 exceeded. At Castleman and Plantagenet, at Castleman, 35 observation, 34 exceeded, so only one of them passed. South Nation River at Plantagenet, 40 observations, 39 exceeded phosphorus guideline values. So only one, again, was below the phosphorus level. Scotch River, 34 observation, 27 exceedances. Scotch River again, West Branch, 39 observations, 37 exceedances. Scotch River mouth at Riceville, 32 observations, and 32 over phosphorus minimal guideline. One last, it's at Cobb Lake Creek, 39 observations and 39 exceedances of phosphorus. Not one of them had below the phosphorus threshold level. And what does the South Nation say about that? They say there's minor exceedances. Right? Minor exceedances. By the way, they have nitrate and chloride do have some, although not a lot, compared to phosphorus, because phosphorus is almost 100% at Plantagenet. So where the South Nation River meets the Ottawa River, there is too much phosphorus getting into the Ottawa River. So we're below forest cover. We're below wetland cover, we are over phosphorus, the amount of phosphorus in the water. And we do have some exceedances at some spots of nitrate and chloride, especially downriver. So we got 18% at Castleman, we got 10% at Plantagenet for nitrate. We got 35% in the Scotch River. So there's still a lot. It's very turbid water, meaning that there's a lot of nutrients, excess nutrients, meaning there's a lot of algae bloom, meaning that there's a lot of oxygen leaving the water, meaning that there's nothing for the fish to breathe. Generally, and I'm quoting the SNC, surface water quality in SNC jurisdiction is considered fair. Nitrate, chloride, and zinc levels are low, while total phosphorus levels exceed provincial water quality objective at every water quality station across the watershed. Total phosphorus exceedances are minors in the headwaters of the South Nation River as the river flows downstream and accumulates additional inputs. Total phosphorus level increase among the main branch of the SNR, the South Nation River, between South Mountain and Chesterville, as well as between Chesterville and Castleman. This emphasizes the importance of continuing to implement phosphorus reducing program within these areas. There's a lot of politicking in this statement. First, the South Nation Conservation went from stating that 77% of its stream were in good to fair conditions, to stating that their surface water is considered generally fair. It's okay to stretch the truth in the introduction, good to fair, but once the data is presented, generally fair. Turbidity isn't represented, erosion isn't represented, sedimentation isn't represented, key indicator species for flora or fauna isn't represented, algae blooms aren't represented, invasive species aren't represented, endangered species aren't represented, and so on. The South Nation Conservation can barely offer a basic view of our environment without having to take a defensive position and justify itself instead of gathering more incriminating but necessary data in order for the public to live a better quality of life than it currently has. I don't know if you've looked in the watershed, but wherever there's a wetland, you'll see a lower quality of life. Second, nitrate and zinc levels are not low. Chloride levels are low. It might be accurate to call them minor exceedances of nitrate and zinc, but they are happening in every subwatershed except the tributaries upstream of South Mountain. This isn't one or two exceedances, but up to 35% exceedances in the Scotch River, 21% exceedances in the Payne River, and a steady 3% of exceedances for zinc in the majority of subwatershed. So we're going over the limit for all of our nutrients, just not as much as phosphorus, which is all over the watershed. There's not one place almost, right, that is safe from phosphorus in the watershed. This and she should have said that phosphorus level exceeded provincial water quality objective at every water quality station on virtually every observation made. Yet amidst these worrying revelations of toxicity in the watershed, the South Nation Conservation feels as if it has made progress worthy of taking credit. So I'm quoting the State of the Nation report. Total phosphorus levels have been decreasing over time. Trends show a dramatic increase in total phosphorus concentration from the first 15 years period to the second 15-year period. This decrease can be attributed to the construction or improvement of sewage treatment lagoons in Embrun, Castleman, and Winchester, as well as the decision to restrict phosphate concentration in detergents. A decrease is observed from the second 15-year period to the third 15-year period as well. This is likely due to improvement in agricultural land management, program implemented by South Nation Conservation, such as the Total Phosphorus Management Plan and the Clean Water Program, as well as the increase of forest cover on the landscape. So the South Nation Conservation is taking credit for the lowering of phosphorus, at least in part, from the third year period to the fourth 15-year period, right? Or to the second to the third. But they're saying that the Total Phosphorus Management Plan and the Clean Water Program help, and they've been implemented by the South Nation Conservation. I would like to know if the councillors and the mayors and the people involved in municipal politics would agree that the South Nation Conservation did have a Total Phosphorus Management Plan and the Clean Water Program, and that it did work. Because they can claim that they've helped lower the phosphorus amount, and yet they still can't reach minimum guideline value. They're still not at the minimum yet, and they're taking credit. Oh my God, it's crazy. It's freaking crazy. You're not there yet. You're not there yet. You're not allowed to take credit. You haven't done your job yet. God damn. The South Nation Conservation is congratulating itself for failing to meet provincial objective. Why state that your programs are effective when the data proves otherwise? That's all.